So imagine that you are the new kid at school and it's lunchtime and you've gotten your tray and you're standing there looking at a sea of kids in the cafeteria seated at all the different tables. You don't know anyone and you need to figure out where to sit. So what do, right? You scan the room and you try and find one or two or five kids who look like they might be potential friends, right? Whether that's because they have a similar haircut as you, hairstyle as you, or they wear similar clothes to yours. Maybe it's the color of their skin. Maybe it's something else. You're trying to find some visual cue that tells you that you are safe in that particular group. And we all do this, whether you ever had the pleasure of being the new kid at school. You've certainly walked into a cocktail party where you didn't really know anybody, or you're new at college and you're trying to find your friends. Whatever the scenario, our human nature dictates that we are trying to find a safe space, a safe, smaller space within the bigger space when we are looking at a new scenario. That is true, not just in in-person physical spaces, but online, when we are looking for businesses to work with, when we are seeking out mentors and educators. We're all looking to find people that we connect with. And one of the most prominent ways that we can sense that we are going to be safe in a new space is if we see representation of people that we believe are like us in some way, shape, or form, kind of showcased on that person's website or in their, ads or whatever the case may be. So I think when people toss the words diversity and representation around, we can kind of tune them out if we don't feel like they immediately apply to us in a given situation. But the fact of the matter is, we've all been in situations where we were on the outside and we were trying to find that way of being included. And as business owners, I think that it is really important, sort of ethically, but also just from a business perspective, to be intentional about the diversity and representation that we showcase in our own work. And I am excited to share the conversation that I had today with Tiffany Crenshaw. Tiffany is a family photographer in Alabama, and she is a Black woman. And she was very generous. I was excited when she approached me about sharing about this topic and talking about it on the podcast, because it is a tricky conversation at times. And although I think having someone who has been in the position of not feeling particularly included in a space talk about it is more compelling than me just pontificating about it. It's also the sort of thing where I don't want to put someone on the spot and say, I want you to come educate my community about this or talk to my community about this, because it can be a fraught subject. So the fact that Tiffany approached me with that topic was an opportunity that was too good to pass up. And as I knew it would, this turned into a wonderful conversation that I think you're going to get a lot out of, not just from sort of an inspirational and motivational standpoint, but also from a practical standpoint. So I am going to cue the music and let Tiffany take over.
Welcome to This Can't Be That Hard. My name is Anami Tonkin, and I help photographers run profitable, sustainable businesses that they love. Each week on the podcast, I cover simple, actionable strategies and systems that photographers at every level of experience can use to earn more money in a more sustainable way. Running a photography business doesn't have to be that hard. You can do it, and I can show you how.
Tiffany Crenshaw, welcome to This Can't Be That Hard. It is wonderful to see your face. We got to meet in person this past spring, and this is the first time we've really reconnected since, but I am excited for today's conversation. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited. I've been excited since we met in March at Reset.
Reset, yes, the Reset conference, which I just submitted my application to speak next year. I hope you did too. Maybe I'll get to see you again.
I did. Yes.
Yay.
Hopefully we can reconnect in person.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, this is going to be a great conversation, a meaty conversation, and one that I am just excited to sort of bring back up to the surface. I feel like it's one of those things that it bears repeating as many times as it is required to have somebody kind of get it in their head. But as business owners, we have so many different things that we're trying to pay attention to, trying to, check this box and that box. And portfolio diversity is one of the things that can elude people. Possibly, it's one of those things that isn't on their radar. But then once it becomes on their radar, I think it gets really challenging to figure out how to go about that in a way that is respectful and thoughtful and not tokenizing and all of the different things. But whether you are looking to diversify the color palette of your portfolio or the different kinds of families or couples or whatever it is that you're photographing, there are myriad ways that we can diversify our portfolios, but being intentional about it is so important. So I am excited to hear what you've got to say on the matter. But before we jump into all that light stuff, tell me, I know the answer to this, but why don't you share a little bit about your backstory and how you sort of got to where you are in the photography industry?
Yeah, of course. So I, like many photographers, I feel like I hear this all the time that I used to be a teacher. I don't know why. I don't know what that is in our line of work that we used to be teachers, but I used to teach second grade and I was a reading coach for a long time. And then when I had my second daughter, I just wanted to take pictures of my kids on my phone, nothing serious. And then I thought like, well, let me just get a cheap little camera. I bought it online, like back when there was like Western Union crazy things. Like my husband was like, you're getting scammed. And I said, just give me $100. And that's all I'm asking for, just $100. And so I buy this camera and it comes, and it was my first Rebel, like,
sure.
Canon Rebel. And as I started taking more pictures of the girls, people started asking like, oh, who are you? And, I said, no, this is just for my kids. But after a certain point, and some encouragement from friends, I thought, you know what, let's give this a try and just see if I could even just do a part-time type deal. It took off that first year and I left teaching and then it quickly scaled. And so it's been a great journey. We have an additional child now that gets to be in front of the lens, but I've just become really passionate about documenting families and really capturing the moments that I would want captured for my own children.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. And it's, do you ever have the thing, and I have this with my older son, even though I sort of started down my photography path when he was a baby, I look back at those photos and I cringe and I feel terrible and like all the mom guilt about the fact that he was my guinea pig. And now I make much better photos of other people's little ones than when my kids were little. They get good middle kid age and teenager photos, right. But I'll have to save
it's a little, there are times when those Facebook memories, it's like, bless the memories. I'm happy for them, but also I'm like, wow, I really thought I was doing something back then. And, it's a reminder that we grow, and in 5 years from now, there are going to be things in my work that I'm like, wow, like I've really shifted and I've grown, so.
It is an evolution and yes, and a journey. And it is one that I feel like it tells its own story, even though that's not the part that we're selling, looking back on it.
Right.
It is a documentation of our own sort of changing viewpoint and changing sort of the rolling landscape of learning. So, anyway, yeah, well, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one.
Nope, you're not.
I get jealous of people when it's like, they're so talented and well-established and whatever. And then they start their families. I'm like, oh, you get the good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit about your experience. Cause I know we talked about this in sort of as you got into photography and you were looking around for mentors and other people who are, in the photography industry, and sort of the experience that you found when it came to diversity or lack thereof in a lot of portfolios out there.
Yeah. So, being self-taught, like I know many of us are, you kind of go into this space where you realize like, I need help. I need training. I need mentoring. We buy all the retreats and the things and the workshops. And as I was attending those, I kept noticing that there was nobody that looked like me at these workshops, retreats. And it was a very isolating experience in a lot of ways because I wanted to feel, we all want to feel a sense of belonging. Like, okay, these are my people.
Sure.
And that we know that, okay, you have some, because of your background, you have some similar experiences, or even just in knowing how to edit, attending some of these workshops and things when, there'd be editing of, darker skin tones, it would be very washed out.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer was just kind of like, well, this is the preset, like, and so I felt like I really need to find some spaces where I feel like there is some more representation. Even, in mentoring locally, it helped my business tremendously, but I still felt like I was lacking that help from people that had similar backgrounds, or even just people that were willing to have conversations really about it, or willing to say, oh, I don't know, but I would like to learn, you know? And so going to conferences when you're the only person that looks the way you do, it's very intimidating.
Sure.
And you can feel a little bit like, I don't know if I quite belong here. And so I just really wanted that to be different.
And rightly so. And so from there, how did you proceed? Did you find those spaces? Did they exist? Did you work on creating those spaces? I feel like over the course of time, you have become one of those people for people, an opportunity for people to see success represented in a different place. And it also comes down to your geographical location being, in the South. I feel like it's a little bit different than in big cities on the coasts. But being in that position is sort of, I imagine it's a double-edged sword. So yeah, talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah. So, and actually it was Reset the first year I applied. It was one of those late night things where, I was just like, I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if I'm ready to hit send. It was my first time applying for a conference and, sent it off and kind of was like, okay, that's not going to happen. And then the next day they had a cancellation and needed someone. And so I felt really excited to be able to kind of open that door for people because I think whether it's business wise or just our clients, even, they want to see, okay, there are people like me here. Like, I think this is a safe space. And so, I think kind of going into these different conferences, I'm teaching at Imaging this year on diversity, and being able to go onto these platforms and be able to be a voice, I think is kind of a starting place. And like you said, if it doesn't exist, sometimes we just have to create it. It's the same in our businesses. Like there's systems, you know that very well, that if they don't exist, then we create them. And so that's kind of the journey I'm on right now.
Amazing. And I would love to hear a little bit more about the sort of barriers along that path that you may have encountered, or if not, if it has been just a walk in the park and everybody's been like, yeah, great, wonderful, then how that has shown up in your own sort of business. I was going to say life, and maybe they intersect, but how that has sort of broadened your community within the greater photography community.
Yeah. So, and there are definitely barriers, one being, I think, helping people see the need for something, because when we're comfortable, we don't seek out change. And so, if you aren't personally affected by a lack of diversity, then it doesn't really become something that you are, pushing to make different. And that's
Right.
just human nature. That's with anything, not just diversity. But if we're comfortable, we don't see a need
Sure.
for growth. And so I think some of it is just a lack of information and a lack of awareness. And so helping people, like putting words to that and helping bring awareness. One of those barriers, I think, is just helping people find it valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes, you can teach on these topics and you don't have a big audience. And, it's like I'm teaching kind of to myself here,
Mm-hmm.
or the people that are already doing this. And so I think that can be a challenge, is just helping people see that these things are for the good of all of us, not
Mm-hmm.
just for the people that are directly impacted by it.
Yeah, I would argue that we are all impacted by it. It's just a matter of whether you are impacted by being pulled out of your comfort zone, forced to take another perspective on something, forced to confront maybe the biases or the privileges that you enjoy, is a different ask, certainly, than someone who stands to feel more welcome in a community or feel more comfortable, and I certainly, as person who is, I'm white and I enjoy a lot of privilege around that. But I've been in situations in photography where I was one of very few women in the room. And this was back when I was first learning. A couple of the first classes that I took it was like me and a bunch of like older guys who were just kind of puttering around with their cameras and who could not have taken me less seriously. And,
Right.
And so, yeah, but it's a weird position to be put in where you're like, I think that I know what's going on here, but nobody wants to acknowledge that, but it's there. It's like the elephant in the
Right.
room. And when you're on the end of it that is less comfortable, it's hard.
Right. It is. And I think for a long time, part of the issue is that, at least and I'm only speaking in terms of my experience, as a Black photographer, but there's so many different demographics and backgrounds. But specifically in the Black community, the majority of photographers, when they decide to start a business, the go-to is studio and lights.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just kind of if you're a Black photographer, you're going to be doing more of your pose portrait work. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there hasn't really been a space for lifestyle work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when people come into photography, they think this is the path I need to be on because this is the only thing. In Huntsville, where I live, I'm the only Black lifestyle photographer that does families. In Alabama, the only one that does newborns that's not studio, that's lifestyle. And so that's just crazy to me.
That is crazy.
It's mind blowing to think wow, you really are. That's it. You're the only one. And slowly I've been finding some community and finding some other lifestyle photographers that are of color, Asian, Black, different origins. But I think that it's just so rare that people see that, oh, I don't have to just do this thing that everyone does.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think trying to help people see that, I think we're going to see more people coming into even lifestyle photography and seeing oh, this isn't just for blonde people on the side of a mountain. This can be for anybody, you know? And so, it's very interesting how we gravitate towards what's already been established and what's already familiar.
Right. And I think that within our communities, however those get defined, when we are new, we are looking to people who are some number of steps ahead of us in the process, and we latch onto that. And I can absolutely see how if everyone who you've seen sort of go before you is going in a particular direction, like studio and lit and all that sort of stuff, it just becomes sort of the well-trodden path, and taking a different approach is tricky. I'm curious to know, it sounds like you were doing conferences and education just in whatever space you could find within lifestyle, and then recognizing oh, I am perhaps the only person of color in the room, or, this is like that lack of representation, did that slow you down at all? Do you feel like when, did it become something that you started to search for when you were looking at conferences and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I don't feel like it has slowed me down. It has made me a little more selective. I do a lot more research when I'm going to
Sure.
go to a conference because I need to know, not that it has to be, no one has arrived, like, right? Like we're all learning. And the fact is there aren't going to be a lot of Black lifestyle photographers because there aren't a lot of Black lifestyle photographers.
Right.
There's only a handful that I know of in the States. And so, and compared to, we know how many photographers there are in our little cities, like there's so many, but it's more looking for examples that there's inclusion, that women are represented, that minorities are represented, that on their panel of speakers in the past, have they had representation? Have they had people that are different and that aren't, just the same type of person every time? Or is it a space where I feel like this is maybe a bigger platform and I have a chance to really reach people and help inspire them in this way? And so, so those are things that I've looked for. And honestly, with a lot of workshops and things, I've pulled back some from those just because it's not always the environment where the change is being sought after. And so I'm like, I really have to focus my time. We all have such a limited time resource. And so really focusing in the areas where I feel like, okay, I can learn and I can also help make a difference here.
Yeah. So for several years, I was one of the co-founders of, and then was running the family narrative for a while. And that was always a high priority for us, was representation in a handful of different ways. And it was challenging. It was humbling because, of course, again, you're trying to be intentional about that sort of thing can result in sometimes feeling awkward or that sort of thing. And which actually I feel like is a good segue. We've been talking about this in the photography industry and your experience as a photographer and learning as a photographer and all that sort of thing, which is very important. I want to flip it around to now kind of steer the conversation in terms of how this affects us as photographers and the people that we are serving or trying to serve as our clients, because it's this same issue exists in all the different parts of our business. So I would love to talk about how it is that as a I don't care who you are. You have, we all are our own specific sexual orientation, race, religion, all able-bodiedness or not, all the different things. And so whatever perspective we are coming from typically tends to be the most represented or one of the better represented in our portfolio. And so as we are trying to be intentional about diversifying our portfolios, it can be challenging, especially if we happen to be in a majority kind of a space, then it gets into like, okay, well, if no one who doesn't look like me, doesn't, sort of participate in the same or isn't part of the same circles as I am, if no one is hiring me, how do I diversify my portfolio?
Right. And yes, I like that you segued because it really is the two sides of the same core issue, but two sides. And so, and I've experienced it from both of those ends.
Right.
Our own personal family is very diverse. My husband is half Cuban, half Caucasian. My children are biracial. And so even in me looking for services, I have to be very intentional and very choosy about how I find photographers that can accurately represent us.
Sure.
We have different skin tones, and even within my children, they have many different skin tones.
Right.
And then there's my husband, who's a lot fairer skinned. And so finding people that I can see have a command over their editing, that I know, okay, you're not going to make us look washed out. You're not just going to apply the same thing that works maybe for these other skin tones, but not for us. It has been a challenge over the years.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to share a story with you. A couple years ago, I had a woman reach out to me that was getting married. She sent in an inquiry and she said that she wanted me to photograph her wedding. At the time, I had never photographed a wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And I emailed and responded, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I'm not a wedding photographer." And, she responded, "Oh, I know." But she was very fair skinned and her husband is from Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
And she said that she had been looking for a photographer to do their wedding and not having any success. Either they washed him out or
Right.
they made her look very orange, very, discolored. And she's like, "I can't find anyone." But when I look at your portfolio, I can see that you can edit for both of those skin tones. And so, we got on a phone call. I kept trying to dissuade her because this is a wedding, right?
Right. Not a small ask.
It's not a small ask. And I'm one that's very much like, I'm going to acknowledge when something is not in my
Sure.
wheelhouse,
Yeah.
There's enough pie for everyone. We don't all need all the slices. And
Right.
so, I tried to discourage her, but at the end of the day, she was like, "I want you." And so I said, "All right, let's do this. I'm going to learn. I'm going to figure this out." And it was beautiful. The wedding was beautiful. The images, were great, but that experience really was eye-opening for me.
Right.
That there are people out there that really are staying away from professional photography services because they don't see anyone that looks like them. Even though it happened to me personally, I guess I hadn't seen it
Mm-hmm.
as something that, oh yeah, other people are having the same reservation,
Sure.
maybe.
Yeah. I mean, we want to see people who look like us. We also want to feel seen and appreciated
Right.
for who we are. And when it comes to photography, obviously there's we want to be made to feel the beauty that we feel, or maybe that we don't feel.
Right.
But that we are all looking to be sort of seen through a compassionate lens, or being
And
able
respectful,
to,
really,
respectful for sure.
feeling respect.
That's amazing. Did not kick off a major new line of work for you. Was that your one and only wedding, or have you done any since?
No, it was not. I do about probably one or two a year.
Okay.
Families and newborns are my heart, but there are the occasional that, weddings that I'll take on here and there. And so it did open a door for something that I didn't think I would enjoy. And I do in small doses.
Sure. Yeah, I totally understand that. Amazing. Okay. So as far as sort of practical advice for anybody out there who, after listening to this, opens up their website and is like, "Oh yeah, this is definitely something that I need to work on," what recommendations do you have for those people who don't really know where to start?
Yeah. And that's the biggest thing that I encourage people to do an audit of their websites. Scroll through your Instagram. When's the last time you've seen someone that had a different background or circumstance, or, than you, and then your norm? And sometimes when we are having to keep scrolling too long, it can be really eye-opening that, oh, okay, yeah, I don't have any representation on my feed. And so the first thing I would say is not to be discouraged, but to use it as a chance to make a plan, moving forward. And so one of the biggest ways that I have been able to really, even in my own work, to help with making sure that I'm including a lot of different people is doing very intentional model calls.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes model calls, we hear them as photographers and we just think like, oh, let me just, I need a model. And then you hear a lot of frustration with people like, I got this family that was not a fit, and was, and so I think being very intentional with your model call process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to be specific with what you're looking for. I think we can get very nervous that we are going to say the wrong things and offend people. And sometimes at the end of the day, someone will always be offended because that's just a state of mind that people sometimes choose to exist in. But the majority of people are going to find value and feel respected at your efforts. And so stating in your model call that you're looking for a family of Asian descent with 2 young children to do, a photo shoot with. That is okay. I think there's nothing wrong with saying that. And I've had experiences in the past where I've done that. And, sometimes I still have someone that is not of Asian descent, that's like, well, we're not technically Asian, but, and I'm like, no, that's not what, but it helps you to really open the door to people that you might not be in contact with regularly.
Right.
And so I think it's completely fine. That would be one suggestion. Also, I think putting yourself out there in your community is very important, because like, as you mentioned in the beginning, we don't want this to be, I'm only doing this so that my little squares on Instagram can look different. It has to start with a heart of, I actually want my life to be full of the beauty that is around me and not just my little bubble. And so attending, like, I know all cities have different cultural festivals and, different food truck experiences that might be like, Hispanic food truck day or all these different things. Like, just get outside and go and meet people, like genuinely meet people. I think that is going to help so much, and just bringing in some natural diversity, and even just as a person learning things that you didn't know before. Right.
Yeah. And it's getting outside your comfort zone is exactly what it sounds like. It's outside your comfort zone. And I often liken this to, and you can tell me whether you think it's an apt description, but it's like going to a different country where you speak a little bit of the language and being willing to show up and sound like a 3-year-old. And how there are going to be, I was just talking to somebody about this who was going to France, and they were like, oh, the French are, notoriously hard on tourists. And I was like, first of all, I feel like that's a broad generalization. I used to live in New York, and people said that about New Yorkers too. And I was like, if you're standing in the middle of the road, like staring up, and I'm trying to get to work, you may perceive me as being rude if I just kind of brush past you, but I'm not. But the people who are willing to try, even though they feel awkward and maybe it's slower or whatever, sometimes you're going to get pushback or an eye roll or whatever. But if you are genuinely doing your best, there are people who are going to see that as well. And it's, I think it's worth the effort, because then you really are learning more and seeing more and doing more, and can build those connections.
Yeah. I was thinking about, so I did a filming for the Milky Way earlier this year, and I wanted a family that was, I wanted a diverse family. And I was sitting at a coffee shop, and I saw this beautiful Middle Eastern woman and her baby and some of her friends. And, I was doing that weird photographer thing where we're like, oh man, I really, I really want to photograph them, but I don't know, and so finally I went over to her and I said, you have a very beautiful family, and I'm a family photographer and newborn photographer, and I would love the chance to be able to photograph your family if that's something you'd be interested in. And she said, do you own Animal House Photography? And I was like, yes. She's like, I've been following you for years, and have always been scared to reach out. And, she's like, but I've always wanted a session. And so I'm like, well, here you go. Like, that I'm so worked. Glad that I, did the weird thing and, went and spoke with her. And so we ended up filming, and it was such a good experience because there was so much I didn't understand about her culture. And so we sat, the next practical I was going to say is consultations, really sitting down, whether it's on Zoom or in person, whatever your business model or schedule allows for, but sitting face to face with your clients and really asking questions and being, like you said, humble that, okay, I'm a 3-year-old here. I don't know.
Right.
And so with styling, because normally I handle, styling, and I already have my ideas about colors and this and that. And, I knew that they have some cultural specifications that are going to need to be accounted for. And so asking her, like, what is appropriate to wear, and what does this mean? Colors mean different things, and styles mean different things. And so even down to the fact that the month we were filming is Ramadan for them.
Right.
And so they fast for an entire month. And so she said, it's really not a great time
Yeah.
for pictures, because I'm going to be really hungry with 3 small children at the end of the day. And I'm like, you're right. That sounds like a terrible time. And so, we learned that there were exceptions during that month. And so we timed it based on, some exceptions that she shared with me. And it was great. But those were things that I wouldn't have known if I just booked a date and said, we're meeting, we're taking these pictures. Sure. You have to really get in there and not be afraid to ask what you don't know.
Yeah. Do you have any thoughts, or you've kind of addressed this with the get out in the community, lead with your heart, but I find that I mean, even in my own photography career, I have sought to be intentional about diversifying my portfolio and all that sort of thing. And I've ended up with clients that represent a whole bunch of different kinds of backgrounds, which has been lovely. But I sometimes worry that those clients may feel overrepresented in where, like, what I share on my Instagram feed or anything else. And the last thing that I would want to make someone feel is tokenized, but it can be a balance, because even though I have that diversity in my portfolio, it's still, let's call it 30% of the people, or 25% of the people that I'm photographing don't fit a mold that looks like my cis white family. So then, I end up feeling like I've sort of relied heavier on those families and their photos. They give permission for them to be shared. No one's ever said anything to me, but it is something that I have worried about. And I imagine that that's something that other people worry about as well. Do you have any thoughts about that, or any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I personally don't feel like when I see, a different nationality or person of color or different ability in someone's feed, that I'm feeling like, oh, they're just using this. I think some of it might come down to the wording. So when and I think most people would understand this, but maybe some wouldn't. And so when you've done those model calls and you're sharing, you don't want to caption this with anything that's like,
right,
look at this family that's very, right. And that seems silly, but there are, there may be people that don't know that.
Sure.
So I think it's I think it's having them included without any special highlights, just that it's in your feed. And people are going to understand, obviously, like, your feed isn't going to be entirely Asian people or Black people, like that. I would never expect that. My feed is not going to be, all Indian people or Black people or Asian. Like, it's not going to be all of one, because we live in a very diverse spaces.
Society. Sure.
And also it's going to take time, because truthfully, there aren't a ton of families. And I'm speaking from like my work with newborn families. It is very rare for a Black family to hire lifestyle newborn photography. Most you're going to find
not what they're seeing. Yeah.
It's not what they're seeing. Yeah. And so my feed isn't going to only have that, because there aren't a lot of people. And I know that there are not a lot of people seeking it, only because I know that I'm the only one here. So and there's a lot of babies being born. And so, I think people don't expect to only see one thing in your feed. And they're also not upset if there's not more or less. I think they just want to see that it's a balanced thing, and that it's similar to what they see when they go to Target. Maybe the target is 60% Caucasian and 20% African American. So then let's go for at least that type of representation in our feeds, I think.
Yeah. This has been so much good information. And just, again, sometimes it's a matter of, when we are juggling so many different things that we're trying to achieve, to have this re-brought to the surface as something that we need to be thinking about, that we need to be intentional about. Whether you want to think about it in terms of, sort of a responsibility, a societal responsibility, or even just something that, allows you to speak to a wider marketing audience. I think that it's a good thing for people to consider. And you touched on one thing that, so you had approached when we were talking about having you on the show, and you were like, oh, I could talk about this. I could talk about this. I was excited to talk to you about this subject, and also was like, I need to have her on the show multiple times, because same thing. It's like, oh, I appreciate that you're willing to talk about this and that you are helping shed light on this subject in the industry, because I think that it's a really important one. But I also appreciate the fact that education falling on your shoulders, or, being something that is, needs to be explained, is its own sort of burden. So anyway, just wanted to point out that I appreciate you and the work that you're doing. And I'm also looking forward to having you back on the show to talk about motherhood and juggling all of the things all at once. So we will get to that soon. So anyway, well, thank you so much. Let everybody know where they can find you and how they can connect with you further.
Yeah, so you can find me over on Instagram. It's Animal House Photography. Feel free to DM me there. I do have some freebies that are in the works, actually, for a model call.
I love that.
If you head over there, or on my website, which is animalhouse-photography.com, you can sign up on my educator mailing list. And when that model call freebie is ready, then that will be able to head your way and hopefully, give people a place to start.
Amazing. Well, whenever that's ready, send me the link and I'll put it in the show notes so that it lives with this episode as well. Well, Tiffany, thank you so much. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this week's episode of This Can't Be That Hard. I'll be back same time, same place next week. In the meantime, you can find more information about this episode, along with all the relevant links, notes, and downloads at thiscan'tbethathard.com/learn. If you like the podcast, be sure to hit the subscribe button. Even better, share the love by leaving a review in iTunes. And as always, thanks so much for joining me. I hope you have a fantastic week.